So all of those who are joining on the online platform, you are all most welcome. Professor Pashwana will observe the full precedence and protocol in just a moment. So you will permit me to keep my salutation and my greeting short. My name is Charlotte Buitendag. I'm a professor at the Thabo Mbeki School, and it is my privilege today to guide the proceedings as program director. Um, I will not say much about the theme this morning. Professor Paswana will do this properly in a moment, and I can assure you she will do a much better job at it. So, um, I have to admit, though, it is a daunting task to act as program director this morning, especially if you have attended the 2-day workshop on protocol and diplomacy practice. I've learned that I have to watch my steps, I have to watch my sit, I have to watch my words, I have to watch the way that I eat. And so it is a fairly uncomfortable experience in the presence of Her Excellency and our distinguished guest. Um, but the reality is, for me, this is but one morning of uncomfortableness. But for a number of our distinguished ladies um, who are presenting various institutions and countries in multilateral capacities, this is an uncomfortableness that's part of their day-to-day job. And it definitely comes with a cost that none of us actually can appreciate unless you have served in those positions. Professor Pashwana will definitely elaborate a little bit more on that. A few practical matters that I would like us to take note of before we begin. Um, we will run the program until 1 o'clock. We will have a panel discussion and a Q&A following that. And we have set aside ample time for everyone to participate thoroughly so that we can learn from one another's experience and have a rich conversation and enrich our own experiences from one another. We have, like I've already said, we have online participants, and when we get to the Q&A session, they will also have an opportunity to comment online on the platform. As you can gather, this gathering and this session will be recorded, and for those of you like me, who need a refresher afterwards, you will be able to revisit the recording online via YouTube. However, to open this seminar properly, in a proper fashion, I invite Professor Edith Pashwana, our Acting Executive Dean of the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, to deliver the introduction and the welcome. Professor Edith, the floor is yours.
Program Director, Professor Charlotte Buitendag from the Thabo Mbeki School, and she's also the head of simulation and futuristic studies at the Thabo Mbeki School. Thank you for your time, and also thank you for framing and starting this seminar this morning. Miss Phillipa Dianne Lawrence, our guest speaker, and our trainer on on protocol and etiquette. Thank you so much, and I acknowledge your presence this morning. Her Excellency, Miss Joanne Thomas Edwards, the High Commissioner of Jamaica, you're welcome to the Thabo Mbeki School. Members of the Thabo Mbeki School International Advisory Board, represented here by Professor Anne Bailey and Professor Siva Groboki online. You are also welcome to the Thabo Mbeki School. Members of the Thabo Mbeki School management, staff, students, our facilitator, Dr. Goliswa Matebese Nochulwana, members of the diplomatic corps represented here, also Mrs. Nene Mapuola, the cultural attaché at the DRC Embassy. You're welcome this morning. Distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. It is my utmost and distinguished pleasure to be welcoming you here this morning at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. We have been here for the whole week. I can see familiar faces since Monday, and now you are called friends of the Thabo Mbeki School. You deserve to get the honor or the badge for being friends of the school because of your presence since Monday. Some of you who participated also in the training. It is my distinguished pleasure to welcome you again this morning. You are welcome to this seminar on the impact of protocol on women, power, visibility, and institutional practice. I think as the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, we are committed to creating spaces where critical conversation can happen. And this critical conversation must shape policy as well as transform institutions and advance social justice. And this is why you see us engaging in this critical conversation. And today's seminar speaks to that commitment. Protocol is often perceived as a diplomatic practice, if we know. Is a collection of ceremonial rules that actually governs etiquette and official engagements. Yet protocol is much more than that. For me, it is a language of power. It is a language of power. It determines who is seen, who is heard, who is acknowledged, and who occupies positions of influence. So, as we see, institutional practices, whether consciously or unconsciously, can either reinforce historical inequalities or even become instruments for inclusion and transformation, depending how you use them. Because others can use protocol to sustain dominant power relations and continue to do that. Or you decide either through my protocol, I'm going to be inclusive and transformative. Very, very important there. And across Africa and the world, women continue to make remarkable contributions in government, in diplomacy, in academia, in business, in media, in civil society, and international organizations. I'm sure many of us, we have seen African women in these spaces I have actually listed. There are African women. There are women of all kinds in these spaces. However, many still encounter institutional cultures and protocol practices that limit their visibility, diminish their authority, or even exclude them from decision-making spaces, depending on who you are. Where do you sit in the hierarchy of power? Even women who occupy high positions, there are spaces where you see a man of a junior level being given visibility and acknowledgement than a woman who sits. You will have a woman minister, and people, when they come, they will. I've seen it also in various countries all over the continent when we visit with our vice chancellor. She's young, she's a woman. And if we have elder men, people think these men are the vice chancellors. They mistaken these older men to be the vice chancellor. And even in the way we are being received, it's like the vice chancellor until somebody says, no, here's the VC. And then the whole protocol changes. So that's why I argued that protocol is a language of power in the beginning. So this seminar is going to challenge us to examine whether our institutional traditions are empowering women or unintentionally maintaining barriers to equality. Some of us, when we see this happening, we can literally tell that you are not a leader. It doesn't matter what position you occupy. When you do this kind of mistakes and you are in a leadership of position where you tend to undermine women and you acknowledge and you visibilize certain types of people, we can literally tell from where we are standing that there is no leadership. And when we say, because the way we exercise protocol actually speaks to our exercise of leadership and authority. And sometimes we can occupy the position, but actually lack the basic rudiments of what leadership and management is by the way we practice, by the way we exercise what we do. So we know this happens to presidents, this happens to ministers, this happens to ambassadors, high-profile people who the way they practice protocol actually make us doubt. Where did you receive your training? Where were you trained to treat such a high-ranking official in this manner just because she's black, just because she's a woman, just because she's young? We watch these things and we are able to tell that you are not actually a leader. So as future public leaders, and here I'm speaking to our students, they are future public leaders, policymakers, diplomats, and scholars. We have a responsibility to practice protocol, not as a rigid tradition, but as a dynamic instrument that reflects the values of equity, dignity, respect, and excellence. And good leaders that do this kind of things, because I have seen good leaders who, when they are supposed to exercise protocol, it does not matter whether I am a dean and an acting dean for that matter. I have seen good leaders being able to respect the office, even if it's a low level of a dean here, because good leaders have been trained and they understand protocol. It doesn't matter. You may as well undermine or don't respect me as Edith Paswan, but at least respect this office that has been instituted here at the University of South Africa. That is protocol and what it demands. And good leaders know that and have been trained to do that. Inclusive protocol strengthens institutions because it recognizes talent irrespective of gender and creates environments where every voice has the opportunity to contribute meaningfully. Today, I encourage us to engage courageously with the ideas presented or that will be presented here, to question long held assumptions. It is our duty to question these long held assumptions and to generate practical recommendations that can transform institutional practice across our universities, governments, and public institutions. And allow me to express our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speakers and organizers for bringing together these timely conversations. Your expertise and commitment to continue to enrich our understanding of leadership and governance in the first century is commendable. As we deliberate today, let us remember that empowering women is not merely a women's issue, it is a leadership imperative, a governance imperative, and development imperative. Institutions thrive when they harness the full potential of all their people. And with these words, it is my pleasure to officially declare this seminar open. And I wish you stimulating discussions, meaningful engagement, and outcomes that will inspire leading, lasting institutional change. I thank you. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce our guest speaker for this morning, Ms. Phillipa Dianne Lawrence. Ms. Phillipa Dianne Lawrence is an internationally respected protocol, diplomacy, and international affairs expert with extensive experience as a Jamaican career diplomat, a UN civil servant. She formerly served as chief of protocol at the UN office at Vienna, where she coordinated. Yes, I'm sure you can clap hands for her. Indeed, not many Black women go to become chief of protocol at the UN office. So we are really, really proud of you, Ms. Lawrence, where she coordinated high-level visits involving royalty, heads of states and government, senior officials, and diplomatic missions. Her distinguished career has included appointments with the Jamaican Foreign Service, including First Secretary at the Embassy of Jamaica in Washington, D.C., alternate permanent representative to the Organization of American States, deputy chief of mission at the Embassy of Jamaica in Mexico. She also held senior foreign policy and protocol positions at the Caribbean Community Secretariat, is the CARICOM. Ms. Lawrence now shares her expertise internationally through training, lecturing, and professional advisory work in diplomatic protocol, etiquette, and VIP management. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let's put our hands together as we welcome Ms. Phillipa Dianne Lawrence to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to speak on the impact of protocol on women in multilateralism, power, visibility, and institutional practice. I think I prefer to use my computer. Diplomatic protocol is foundational yet under-examined element of multilateral governance, designated to ensure order, equality, and predictability among states. Protocol operates as both a technical and symbolic system of power. This paper examines the impact of diplomatic protocol on women in multilateral settings, arguing that protocol has historically functioned as a gendered structure that shapes access, authority, and visibility. While formally neutral protocol practices are often reproduce patriarchal norms, marginalizing women's participation and leadership, drawing on feminist institutionalism and diplomatic practical. This paper explores how women have been marginalized in the whole process. Multilateral diplomacy relies heavily on protocol rules of governing precedents, representation, ceremonial practice, and institutional conduct. Protocol structures who speaks, who is seen, and who is recognized as authoritative. Despite its centrality to diplomatic engagement, protocol has received limited scholarly attention, particularly in relation to gender. As women's participation in diplomacy and international organizations has expanded, questions have emerged regarding whether protocol practices adequately reflect principles of equality and inclusion. It is proposed that diplomatic protocol, far from being a neutral administrative tool, is a site where gendered power relations are both enacted and contested. For women in multilateralism, protocol can operate simultaneously as a barrier and as a mechanism for empowerment. Three core questions are being asked. How has diplomatic protocol historically shaped women's participation in multilateral diplomacy? In what ways do contemporary protocol practices continue to produce gendered effects? How can protocol be reconceptualized to support gender inclusive multilateral governance? Protocol is often described as the invisible architecture of multilateralism, shaping access, authority, precedence, and voice without always announcing itself. While protocol is intended to ensure order, equality of states, and predictability in diplomatic engagement, its application has not been gender neutral in practice. For women operating in multilateral spaces, protocol has functioned both as a gatekeeper and increasingly as a tool for empowerment. Modern diplomatic protocol emerged from deeply patriarchal political systems in which diplomacy was an exclusively male domain. Rules of precedence, modes of address, ceremonial hierarchies, and informal practices were designed around male diplomats, male heads of state, and male authority. As women entered diplomacy, often decades later, protocol frameworks did not evolve at the same pace. This legacy has produced subtle but persistent challenges. Visibility gaps where women are overlooked in seating, speaking order, or ceremonial prominence. Assumptions of rank where women are mistaken for support staff rather than principals or heads of delegation, as Professor Fashwane mentioned in her opening remarks. Gendered scrutiny, particularly regarding dress codes, comportment, and demeanor, areas where male counterparts enjoy wider latitude. Protocol in these instances does not merely reflect hierarchy, it reinforces power asymmetries that disproportionately affect women. In multilateral diplomacy, some of the most consequential decisions occur not in plenary halls but in informal settings. Cordial negotiations, working luncheons, retreats, and close consultations. These spaces are governed by informal protocol and often unwritten and exclusionary. Women diplomats have historically faced barriers to these spaces due to social norms that exclude women from male dominated informal networks, security or cultural practices that limit participation in late night or off site engagements, perceptions that equate authority with traditionally masculine styles of engagement. As a result, protocol, formal and informal, can determine not only where women sit, but whether they are in the room at all. Despite these constraints, women in multilateralism have increasingly used protocol strategically to assert presence, claim authority, and reshape norms. Examples include reclaiming precedence, women heads of delegation and senior officials insisting on correct forms of address, seating, and ceremonial recognition, redefining diplomatic comportment, challenging the notion that authority must look or sound masculine, institutional reform, advocating for gender sensitive protocol guidelines within international organizations, including inclusive language, equitable speakers lists, and transparent accreditation processes. In this sense, protocol becomes not just a constraint, but a lever, a formalized system that can be corrected, enforced, and modernized. Intersectionality and unequal impacts. It is critical to note that the impact of protocol on women is not uniform. Women from the global south, women of color, younger women diplomats, and women representing small states often face compounded challenges. Protocol breaches affecting these women are more likely to be dismissed as misunderstandings rather than recognized as structural bias. The intersectionality reality underscores the need for protocol to be understood not as neutral procedures, but as practice shaped by power, history, and representation. Today's multilateral system is undergoing pressure to modernize, driven by calls for inclusivity, legitimacy, and credibility. Protocol reform is part of this transformation. Gender responsive protocol is increasingly recognized as essential to upholding the principle of sovereign equality, ensuring meaningful participation, reflecting the diversity of contemporary diplomacy. Some organizations have begun to address this through training, revised manuals, and gender balanced ceremonial planning. Progress remains uneven and often dependent on individual leadership rather than institutional commitment. Protocol is commonly defined as a body of rules and conventions governing diplomatic interactions. From a feminist institutionalist perspective, institutions are not gender neutral. They are embedded with norms, values, and power relations that reflect the context in which they were created. Protocol as an institutional practice reflects the historical dominance of men in diplomacy and international politics. Formal protocols such as seating arrangements, order of precedence, titles, and ceremonial roles operates alongside informal protocol, which governs access to decision-making spaces, networks, and influence. Informal protocol is particularly significant in multilateral diplomacy, where negotiations often occur outside formal plenary settings. By shaping both visibility and legitimacy, protocol functions as a form of symbolic power. Recognition through protocol signals authority, while exclusion or misrecognition undermines professional standing. For women diplomats, this symbolic dimension has concrete implications for influence and career progressions. Modern diplomatic protocol emerged in an era when women were excluded from formal diplomatic roles. Until the mid 20th century, diplomacy was widely considered incompatible with women's perceived social roles. Protocol manuals, ceremonial practices, and diplomatic culture were therefore constructed around male diplomats and male leadership. When women entered diplomatic services and multilateral institutions, they did so within frameworks that had not been designed with them in mind. Historical exclusion and gendered norms. Gendered expectations persisted regarding appropriate behavior and demeanor, dress and appearance, authority and leadership style. Women diplomats frequently encountered situations where protocol did not explicitly prohibit their participation but failed to protect it, leading to marginalization through omission rather than overt exclusion. Despite significant progress in gender representation, protocol continues to affect women unevenly in multilateral environments. Women leaders and senior officials have reported being misidentified as support staff, excluded from heads of delegation recognition, or omitted from ceremonial precedence. Such protocol lapses, while often dismissed as administrative errors, reinforce assumptions about who embodies authority in international politics. Informal diplomatic practices, close consultations, late night negotiations, receipts, and social engagements remain critical to multilateral outcomes. Women may face exclusion from these spaces due to entrenched networks, security considerations, or cultural norms, limiting their ability to shape consensus. Women in multilateral diplomacy are subject to heightened scrutiny regarding adherence to protocol, particularly in areas of dress and comportment. Deviations are more likely to be interpreted as unprofessional or disrespectful, constraining women's ability to exercise agency. The impact of protocol on women is not homogeneous. Intersectional factors including race, nationality, age, and geopolitical power shape how protocol is applied and enforced. Women from the global south or small states often face compounding marginalization, where breaches of protocol affecting them are less likely to be corrected or acknowledged. The differential application challenges the principles of sovereign equality that underpins multilateralism and raises questions about the credibility of international institutions committed to inclusion and fairness. While protocol has constrained women's participation, women have also been central to its transformation. Female diplomats, protocol officers, and institutional leaders have increasingly asserted protocol as a professional safeguard rather than a ceremonial formality. Key strategies include insisting on correct titles, precedence, and representation, advocating for transparent and standardized protocol procedures, integrating gender considerations into protocol manuals and training, using protocol to protect dignity and authority in hostile or dismissive environments. These interventions demonstrate that protocol is not static, it evolves through practice and leadership. Multilateral institutions derive legitimacy from fairness, representation, and respect for diversity. Protocol practices that marginalize women undermine those principles and weaken institutional credibility. Conversely, gender responsive protocol contributes to meaningful participation, institutional trust, normative leadership, and equality. As multilateralism faces growing challenges, reforming protocol practices is not a peripheral concern, but a core governance issue. Empirical evidence from multilateral institutions illustrates how protocol operates as a gendered mechanism in practice, shaping women's authority, visibility, and access to influence. The following case studies highlight recurrent patterns across global and regional organizations, while also demonstrating sites of institutional learning and reform. The United Nations. The United Nations provides one of the clearest illustrations of the gendered effects of protocol due to its highly codified ceremonial and procedural environment. While the UN formally upholds gender equality, women diplomats have repeatedly encountered protocol related challenges affecting recognition and authority. Empirical observations from General Assembly sessions and high level meetings indicate that women permanent representatives and ministers have been incorrectly addressed by title or rank, omitted from head of delegation listings during formal announcements, misplaced in seating arrangements at the ministerial status relative to male counterparts. Such lapses are rarely intentional, yet have material consequences. In UN diplomatic culture, correct protocol signals legitimacy and respect. Deviations undermine perceived authority, particularly in highly performance settings such as plenary debates or the high level week. Notably, women ambassadors have increasingly responded by invoking protocol rules explicitly, requesting corrections on the record, engaging directly with protocol officers, and leveraging institutional procedures to assert equal treatment. These actions demonstrate how protocol, when enforced rather than ignored, can serve as a protective institutional mechanism. The UN Security Council highlights a distinction between formal and informal protocol. While formal meetings adhere strictly to rules of procedure, many substantive negotiations occur through formal consultations, drafting groups, and closed door engagements governed by unwritten norms. Empirical studies of Security Council working methods reveal that women representatives, particularly those from the elected E10 members, are less likely to be included in informal drafting processes dominated by permanent members and long established diplomatic networks. These exclusions are not codified, but persist through informal protocol that privileges familiarity, seniority, and traditionally masculine modes of engagement. Women diplomats have reported that exclusion from these spaces reduces their ability to influence outcomes, even when they formally represent the Council in plenary settings. The case illustrates how informal protocol can undermine formal equality and how gendered norms operate most powerfully where rules are least visible. Regional organizations, CARICOM and the politics of small states. Within regional organizations such as the Caribbean Community, Protocol intersects with both gender and geopolitical power. Women diplomats from small states often face compounded challenges related to visibility and authority in multilateral negotiations. Empirical examples from ministerial councils and heads of government meetings show that women representatives have encountered reduced speaking time in informal consultations, assumptions that senior authority resides with male colleagues, limited access to consensus building spaces prior to formal sessions. However, CARICOM has also demonstrated adaptive practice. Women leaders and senior officials have actively reshaped protocol norms by insisting on equitable speaking orders, formal recognition of delegation leadership, and transparent procedures for chairing meetings. These interventions have strengthened institutional coherence and set precedents for inclusive protocol application. Large-scale multilateral conferences such as climate negotiations, development summits, and treaty conferences provide additional empirical insight. These settings often combine rigid ceremonial protocol with fluid informal engagement. Women negotiators have reported heightened security of comportment and adherence to protocol norms, particularly in high visibility roles such as committee chairs or facilitators. Deviations from expected behaviors are more likely to be interpreted as unprofessional, reinforcing narrow definitions of authority. At the same time, women chairs and facilitators have strategically used protocol to manage negotiations, enforcing speaking rules, time limits, and procedural order to counter attempts at domination or disruption. In these cases, protocol functions as a gender neutralizing tool, enabling authority to be exercised through institutional rules rather than personal power. Some multilateral institutions have begun to institutionalize lessons from these experiences. Empirical evidence from UN entities and regional organizations indicates gradual progress in gender balanced speaker lists, revised protocol manuals with inclusive language, training for protocol officers on gender bias and misrecognition, standardized accreditation, and seating procedures. While uneven and often dependent on leadership, these reforms suggest a growing recognition that protocol is not merely ceremonial, but integral to institutional legitimacy and effectiveness. What the case studies reveal. Taken together, these case studies demonstrate that protocol operates as a mechanism of symbolic and material power, affects women's participation most sharply in informal settings, intersects with race, geography, and state power, can be reclaimed and reshaped through conscious institutional practice. Women's engagement with protocol is therefore not passive adaptation, but active governance, one that challenges the assumption that neutrality lies in tradition rather than equity. For women in multilateralism, in conclusion, protocol is never merely procedural. It shapes authority, legitimacy, and professional safety. When applied rigidly and uncritically, it can reproduce exclusion. When applied consciously and equitably, it can protect dignity, ensure fairness, and elevate women's leadership on the global stage. The future of multilateral diplomacy demands a shift from protocol as mechanical compliance to protocol as conscious practice, one that recognizes gender dynamics, corrects historical imbalances, and affirms that representation without respect is not equality. In that transformation, women are not only beneficiaries of protocol reform, they are among its most effective architects. Diplomatic protocol profoundly shapes women's experiences in multilateralism. While formally neutral, protocol has historically reflected gendered power relations that affect access, visibility, and authority. Yet protocol also offers a structured avenue for reform, one can institutionalize respect, protect equality, and normalize women's leadership. This paper argues for a shift from protocol as a rigid transition to protocol as conscious institutional practice. Gender responsive protocol is not symbolic accommodation, it's a prerequisite for effective and legitimate multilateral governance. Women are not merely adapting to protocol, they are redefining it, ensuring that the architecture of diplomacy reflects the realities of a diverse international community. I thank you.
I think that deserves another round of applause. Thank you very much, Miss Lawrence. I think the audience's response is actually showing you the appreciation and the impact of what you've just shared with us. At this point, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the SABC. Talking of agents and advocates, thank you for being now an active agent to promoting gender sensitive diplomacy in Africa. We now turn to the panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Dr. Matibekoli Matabite Mochelwana. She is a well-published senior postdoc or a postdoctoral fellow at the Thabo Mbeki School. She will be joined by Her Excellency Ms. Joan Thomas Edwards, the High Commissioner of Jamaica. May I ask you to please come to the front? While they do that, and just before you acknowledge them, I just want to say that Dr. Coley will do the formal and will do justice on an introduction to Her Excellency.
Thank you, Prof, and good morning. I'd like to greet the leadership of Thabo Mbeki African School, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are about to begin our next session in response to the very informative presentation we just had. Our next panel discussion is going to be led by Her Excellency, Miss Joanne Thomas Edwards. She is High Commissioner of Jamaica, a senior career diplomat, and currently High Commission to the Republic of South Africa. She is a veteran Jamaican diplomat with over 37 years of experience. In her current role in South Africa, she is accredited to 18 to 19 countries across Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, without wasting any more time, we're going to engage, we're going to indulge you as Prof has encouraged you and asked you to courageously ask questions. Following her presentation, we will now go into question and answer sessions. Please take notes, feel free, and thank you for staying with us until now. Over to you, Her Excellency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I just want to acknowledge also the acting dean of the Thabo Mbeki School. I really appreciate the partnership between the High Commission and the school. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Phillipa Lawrence, lecturer emeritus, I've now styled her, my former colleague and a very good friend. Distinguished guests, and I noted the SABC. I looked at the room and I saw a familiar face. So it's really my pleasure to respond to the presentation made by Philippa Lawrence. It makes my work a little easier. What I'm going to do, I'm going to focus on the Jamaican and, in some aspects, the Caribbean experience. How is it that we have navigated the space in terms of utilizing protocol in advancing multilateralism, the power, visibility, and institutional practice? So I'll highlight a few things. I'm aware that I do not have a lot of time, but I'm going to frame this in this context. I did a bit of research and I looked at the Women in Diplomacy Index. There's a 2006 version, and it has reported that only 22% of ambassadors and permanent representatives worldwide are women, which means that 80% are men. Women are largely still underrepresented in top diplomatic posts. So diplomacy, as Ms. Lawrence highlighted, still remains largely a man's work. But this is changing, but it's slowly. So when I looked at the top countries in terms of female ambassadors, Canada ranks the highest with 51%, Sweden 53%, Finland, and in terms of Jamaica, we, along with Antigua and Barbuda, Costa Rica, New Zealand, Philippines, South Africa, Netherlands, Latvia, Norway, Australia, between 40 to 48%. So, and Jamaica ranks about number 6 worldwide. So I'm going to create a context in terms of the Jamaican context and women's representation. We have progressively had legislation to improve um, gender parity and gender equality. So we have legislation in place committed to the economic empowerment of all women. And we have a number of ministries, departments, agencies that dedicate their resources towards continued development and implementation of programs and projects that seek to assist women. And I won't go into all of them, but in terms, I'll just do some highlights. In terms of the legislative framework, we have the Jamaica's Charter for Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, and it guarantees freedom from discrimination on the basis of gender. There's the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act of 1975 that stipulates that men and women in the same establishment should be equally compensated for equal work. Likewise, barriers for women to work in their chosen field have been addressed with legislation, such as the laws that speak specifically to GBV, included the newly enacted Sexual Harassment Prevention Act in 2021. I wanted to create that scenario for you to see what we are operating in terms of the Jamaican context. So here I am, High Commissioner for Jamaica to South Africa and to Southern and Eastern Africa. But I stand here on the shoulders of women who have pioneered their work in diplomacy. So we have a rich tradition of women in diplomacy, and they have paved the way for my inspiring and productive career as a female diplomat. But it wasn't without challenge. And as highlighted by Phillipa, protocol is at the heart of diplomatic practice. It can either make or break relationships. So it's essential in effective international relations. It's, as she said, it demonstrates respect, equality, and hierarchy among participating states. So, just a bit of history. In 1975, Jamaica appointed its first female ambassador, right? And at that time, gender issues were not sexy. And the first female ambassador was Ambassador Carmen Paris, and she was assigned to France. I also highlight another ambassador in 1982, the first female Under Secretary General of the United Nations, Dr. Lucille Mathurin Mayer. Ambassador Patricia Durant, female permanent representative to the United Nations. I had the privilege and honor to work with her directly. So she was my mentor as well as I came into the service. So this is what I inherited when I came into the service. We also have our first female prime minister in 2006, So I'm creating that background. And our first female foreign minister in 2016, and she still is foreign minister for the last 10 years. So this is the legacy that I have inherited. So where are we now in our foreign ministry? 82% of senior management in the foreign ministry are women. 23 out of 28 senior managers are women. And out of Jamaica's 21 missions worldwide, about 10 or half of that are women. And it's the same for deputies. So the foreign service is really reflective of the wider public service. And emphasis is on professionalism. It's also an indicator of the number of women going to universities and graduating. 80% of women are graduating from our universities, 20% men. So this is what I inherited. So I'm going to give you my journey. I joined the Foreign Service in 1989, and at that time, the service was dominated by men. When I went, a male permanent secretary, most of my bosses were men. So we did have strides made by some women ambassadors who I named before. There were only four when I joined the service. The size of the foreign service then was about 250. Now it is 400. We're a small country, so 400 is big for us. So those three women that I mentioned were role models for me. And in terms of what I learned from them, protocol was very important. We stood on protocol, and that is how we managed to navigate to get some kind of influence. But it wasn't without challenge. There was hard work. They told me personal sacrifices were inevitable. Always have a thirst for knowledge. Excel in everything you do. Think outside the box. I served at United Nations when Jamaica was a sitting member of the Security Council. And it was very important that you knew the rules. So you have to be knowledgeable. That's the first point. Knowledge of the system and how to utilize the system. So be very well read and develop others. And I'm talking about developing others. Phillipa, when I joined the service, Phillipa was there. She was my senior, and I benefited from mentorship from that. So the mentorship is very important. So I wanted to highlight that. Developing networks and alliances, important in multilateral diplomacy. You cannot survive if you do not have a network. You cannot survive if you do not have interest. I'm using the word interest and I'm not saying friendships because the first thing I was taught by my boss, Ambassador Patricia Durant, was that in the world of diplomacy, there are no friends, there are only interests. So this is something to bear in mind. So as was highlighted in the presentation by Ms. Lawrence, within the multilateral setting, um, a lot of informal discussions, informal informals, that's how you negotiate the space. So you have to know the space and develop your own alliances. So what are some of the challenges that we face as female ambassadors? Some of them are quite obvious. Sacrificing family, that's the first thing. Your family, sometimes you're not able to balance this kind of thing. So there's a huge personal sacrifice. S- Spouses, sometimes, if you're married, sometimes spouses were treated as appendages. So these are some of the things you have to be balancing as a woman. So you need to watch it and ensure that your spouses feel heard and included, especially when they accompany you to post. I mentioned this in some other settings as well. When you're sometimes in the multilateral space, and it's my personal experience as well, you sit in meetings and you make your interventions, and sometimes silence, predominantly men. And this has been my experience, I share that. Absolute silence. You make a point. France takes up, is a developed country, one of the P5. France says to you, France says, "Oh, we should so and so," and then they use the same idea or point that you made, and then somebody says, "Oh, but that was an excellent idea." So one of the things I learned from my boss is to speak up. And so when that happened to me, where my point was not taken, but the same point was spoken by another, a developed country, a man, a male white man, I took the floor and said, "I thank you all for having accepted the proposal which I made, and I see that it has gathered some consensus. Thank you." So you have to be, you have to be, you have to be forceful. I'm not saying that you have to be um, um, aggressive. Well, let me define aggression here, because in our culture, or in the Caribbean culture, Jamaicans, we are considered to be quite aggressive because we are we're forthright in how we speak, but we don't see it as being aggressive. We think it's just being proactive. And so, so, but sometimes we have to temper that when we're in a multilateral setting. We have to, we have to polish it a bit and refine it a bit. But that doesn't mean that you must stay quiet. So so sometimes your ideas are stolen. That is what I'm saying. Sometimes your ideas are stolen in a multilateral setting, or even in a bilateral setting. Sometimes it's stolen, but you have to own your ideas. Right? Now, I'm going to share an example of how, when Jamaica was on the Security Council, we leveraged our position to shape the negotiations. So, as I said before, you have to have knowledge. Ensure that you know your brief and know beyond. When we joined the Security Council in 2000 to 2001, con- conflicts were the order of the day, especially conflicts in Africa. And one of the things that we took on as a mission was, one, we supported Africa. Jamaica always supports Africa and represents Africa and where we are. So we introduced something that was very novel in the Security Council. Now, Security Council deals with peace and war issues, right? For those who are familiar with the UN Charter, Chapter 7 issues, or now you have Chapter 6.5 issues. And here it is, as a team, we brought to bear some of the softer sides of international peace and security. So we championed, along with Namibia, a resolution on women, peace, and security, where we shared, or we brought to the fore, the gender perspective on peacekeeping. Now, it was very difficult to negotiate that, because at that time, the Security Council never looked at thematic issues. No, thematic issues were new. As I said, it's hardcore issues: war and peace, and deploying missions, peacekeeping missions. And it was during our time, and also in Namibia, was also a woman as well. The now president, she was the minister of gender affairs, and she worked along with us as well. And we brought to bear gender, gender issues, because we noted that within the context of war, women and children were disproportionately affected by war. And it's something that needed to be addressed. When you address the gender issues, it could bring about peace and security. And it was adopted. So the Security Council Resolution 1325 was one of the things. It's now 21 years old, but it's one of the things that we have championed when we were there. So that's one way how you can use protocol. At that time, it wasn't considered protocol because we did get a lot of pushback when we introduced thematic issues. They said, "Oh no, the Security Council doesn't do that. That's for the General Assembly." So we had to work doubly in the General Assembly. So there was I working in the General Assembly um, in the peacekeeping committee to introduce this concept. Now, I got a lot of pushback because most delegations here, especially even within Africa, which is quite patriarchal, women in peacekeeping was not something that was done. So having to negotiate that to get buy-in from people. And as you say, Miss Lawrence, when you speak, sometimes women are just not heard. But it took a lot of negotiations and a lot of informals. And we finally got the consensus in the General Assembly, and then we could take it to the Security Council. So that's one of the practical things. We also had thematic issues like children and armed conflict, because we recognize the plight of children in armed conflict and how they suffered disproportionately. So, softer issues. Sometimes you can come in with the softer issues using the protocol to highlight those. So, you have to be savvy. We were a 6-member team when we were on the Security Council, and most of us women, only one man. So, that's very important. Another thing that you need to bear in mind, especially when you're in the multilateral setting, each country has the same weight. You're equal as any other delegation. So you have to always recognize that you're representing your country. Within the multilateral setting, one country, one vote. You all need the votes. So, you know, you have to always bear that in mind. You can't be a shrinking violet. Assertiveness is good. And Jamaican women, we tend to be strong women, as I mentioned about being aggressive, but it's not aggressive. We just call it assertive. So, in terms of the lessons that I'd like us to look at to discuss in the multilateral setting, ensure that you have build good networks. Building alliances is very important. Trustworthiness is very important. We One of the things about Jamaica is that it's seen as a delegation that is principled. So you have to stick to that. Be forthright as well. Be knowledgeable. And I believe that is how we can shape the multilateral landscape if we follow these as women. Thank you.
Wow, so profound. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give her a round of applause once again. We have just had two powerful presentations. Their experiences, their exposure, their energy and courage to stand and champion women's participation in diplomatic spaces is very commendable and courageous. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just heard that protocol is a language of power. I am now going to open a floor for you to ask questions, to make comments. This is very powerful for all of us. I say, because language is power, we've already heard that from Prof and our two speakers. I want to encourage you that your voice is currency. Please make sure that you use your voice. You say your name, you say your institution. We're going to open a floor for a round of 5 questions or comments. And yeah, we're starting that session now. Ladies and gentlemen, I am at your mercy. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Please, Your Excellency, I'm going to have Miss Phillipa, Dianne Lawrence, over so that the questions and comments may also be directed to both our speakers. Thank you very much, Prof. I'm going to take a first round of 5 questions or comments. Use your voice, ladies and gentlemen. We are just being encouraged. Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't be the only one empowered right now. Yes, I cannot be the only one empowered. Women, I'm looking forward. You were nodding your heads, and I was inspired. Yes, we have 1. We have number 2, number 3, Please bring in your diplomatic experiences, 4 and 5. Okay, thank you very much in that order. We're starting with number 1. Thank you.
They accommodate women, number one, and number two, how do current practices bridge those gaps, or do they further widen them? Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Matebese. I have a comment. My name is Teboho Lobakeng. I'm Professor of Security and Intelligence at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. I've listened very carefully to the presentation by Ms. Lawrence, and I'm glad that when Her Excellency Thomas Edwards came in, she basically moderated some of the interventions that I wanted to raise, because while focus on gender is very, very important, and we cannot downplay that, I would like to submit that the problem of the United Nations, especially as a premier multilateral organization, is that it is a very archaic organization. And the problems that are faced by women are also faced by many men who come from what are considered to be very weak countries. Men, even permanent representatives who are male, sometimes are not seen, sometimes they are not even heard. For a number of years, you'll recall that I'm glad that Ms. Thomas Edwards make mention of, conflict situations. You'll recall that there used to be visits, actually they are even continuing today, visits to African countries. And when there are those visits, all the permanent heads of countries in the Security Council will go either to the DRC, Sudan, any conflict situation. But what used to happen is that the leaders of the delegation will always be from the P3, either the US, UK, or France, always, which made male permanent representatives from Africa not to be visible, not to be heard. That situation was changed only in 2007, when the late Ambassador Kumal of South Africa said this is going to come to an end. What we would do is every time there is a visit, there will be a dual leadership of the visit. It will be an African country and any other country. So basically what that tells us is that it is only through voicing issues that the UN can be changed. That is one lesson that we learn, not just for issues of gender, but for issues of reforming the UN as a totality. The last point that I would like to make is that the issue of protocol, by definition, is to make life easy for everyone. Now, if people fail to understand what protocol is all about, for instance, mention was made of people who sometimes, when they receive female a head of delegation, they will mistake, for a man. But the problem there is not so much with protocol, because protocol demands that you should have done your job to make sure that you know who is the head of the delegation. So incompetence of individual, it's something different, because protocol doesn't demand that of you. You have to profile the head of the delegation, know who's the head and where the head is supposed to sit. So those are just a few issues, but also to finally say, I think some of the issues that are presented as problem, surely the UN has moved very far now. I'm a man, so I can't say because I don't experience maybe some of the things. But I think women have been having very good voices at the UN. And the picture as it is, I think the UN has advanced far from women not being seen, women not being heard, because countries send very powerful women. I know, for instance, our own ambassador, Diseko. No meeting could be held if she was in there, because they knew that she will nullify everything. So it's just the power of those women to make sure that they are seen, but that shouldn't be a burden on women. It should be the protocol that allows that. So we shouldn't put burden on women. We shouldn't put burden on those men who come from weak countries to be changing things. UN itself, it's a problem. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Prof. As I'm listening to you, I felt I'm not going to disturb you and ask you to make your comment or your question short, because you just made a presentation and I think it is much received with appreciation. I wish you had indicated that you have so much wealth. Being a former diplomat yourself, we could have invited you to make that presentation. However, thank you so, so much. We're now moving to number 3. Who was number 3 again? Oh, yes, thank you. Hold on.
Hi, my name is Tana Makoka. Um, the example I wanted to use, if you look at,
May you please say your name and the
I did,
institution, please?
I said my name is Tana Makoka. I come from an NGO called Mlando Wabantu. Um, I want to use the example of Dr. Panashi Chugumatse. She wrote the report that became sort of the backbone for the AU framework on reparations for slavery and colonialism. And thank you also, obviously, to CARICOM and Jamaica has also done a lot of work on this. When you speak to her about how it is that at this moment we're able to see so much traction on this, and what she personally did to move the needle on this issue, she said, well, she just shows up as an African woman, knowing that we are legitimate, and that our sovereignty has actually been contested all this time. But that it's no less valid. And so you look at her work that she does, she focuses a lot on specific incidences of encounters between our chiefs and, the colonizers, and how we were, and when I say we, I mean Africans, were contesting sovereignty on a different legal, like on a different jurisprudence altogether. So she puts this framework, she kind of, the foundation of the framework is on this different kind of ideas of sovereignty and jurisprudence. And so she doesn't argue it at all based on sort of modern law or accepted common law. The reason why I use this example is because I would imagine that the protocol system is based on also a culture that isn't necessarily ours. And so, what scope is there, or how would you navigate not only just wanting to be excluded, but actually to transform these systems so that they actually reflect our values? I mean, African values are equally valid. You look at Ubuntu, you look at it, all these things. Our way of seeing humanity is different. The way of communicating respect and honor is different. And so, I just wanted to know, how do we enter the room where we're saying we're equally legitimate? We have equal power based on our own values, not just being able to assimilate to yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I'm now going to give Prof an opportunity.
Uh, Oh, good, good morning, good afternoon. First of all, my name is Professor Ann Bailey from the State University of New York. I am originally, I'm a Jamaican national, and I live between Jamaica and New York. And I just want to say that I am so honored to be represented. We have such great representation in these two brilliant women. Thank you, Ambassador Edwards, High Commissioner Edwards. Thank you, Ms. Lawrence, for these great presentations. It's an honor to be represented um, by people of this caliber. Uh, so thank you for these great representations. My two quick comments. One has to do with, and I'm also, I need to say I'm here because I am the proud member of the advisory board of the African School, the Thaba Mbeki African School of Public Affairs. So thank you to Acting Dean Paswana for this opportunity just to be able to learn as much as we share and give feedback on the board, to be able to learn from the professionals that move through this space. So quick comments. Um, it's, of course, gender inclusion we know is extremely important, and I'm so gratified to know that there's greater parity over time. There's been such progress. But it's a question and a comment based on, I think, some of our experiences that sometimes uh, we also have to be aware that even as women, we can reflect um, patriarchal norms or replicate patriarchal norms. So that's something I'd like to raise. If that's been something that you have seen, or if that's something that, how do we address those issues? And I've seen it in my own self, where where you have to, there has to be some process of corrective behavior because the way we were trained, the way we were um, the schools that we went to and so forth, they all reflected these norms. So we are still a bit of a product of our training, even as women. And so I've seen again, in my own self, ways that I've had to repair, if you will, some of that tendencies. And so I'm wondering if we see that also, even with the inclusion of women, so that we don't just think of representation as a zero-sum game, that we think of the kind of representation that we want as women in these places who mentor other women, who want to, as the last speaker just said, transform the cultures of these organizations and not just be like men, but women. Does that make sense? I think that's really a concern. And then the second quick thing has to do with you talk about the different realities of women in these spaces. And one of the things that comes up for me is the role of appearance. And I just would love some wonderful examples, if you have any, of what that has meant for you in these spaces. Because people like Michelle Obama she's been talking um, she's been speaking very specifically about this in her afterlife after the presidency of President Obama, about how much of a role her parents played here's this brilliant woman who could have been president herself, and yet the focus was so much on her appearance. And we remember this, right? Her hair, her clothes. Not that these things are not important, but it had a disproportionate, is what she was saying, attention to these things. And even Hillary Rodham Clinton, former presidential candidate, also talked about the same thing. Not as much, but I think Michelle Obama, as a Black woman, has really opened up that space to say, what role should it play? And what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Prof, for that comment. Prof. Paswana?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me also commend the two speakers for this insightful and provocative engagement that they have provided this morning. And I think one of the questions that I had, Professor Lebakeng has somehow responded to it, but I would also still like to hear from you, because one of my questions, number one, was on small states as well. Is the same for men in small states, or what we call weak states? Is the experience the same? What women from small states experience, is this the same as men? And I think Prof. Lebakeng also intervened there, and that I would like to hear from you. The second question is also related to how traditional international order has been also changing, and also the coupled with this shift in geopolitical power and the rise of emerging powers such as the Global South and BRICS. And I think we argued about this, or we discussed this, Prof, in one of the evenings, around how also whiteness does not like equality, because the rising of Global South countries such as the BRICS and their insistence on multipolarity, we see also how they have shifted multilateralism and how we engage on the stage, because of the influence that these countries are also making in different ways, and they are also creating new forms of cooperation, particularly at regional levels. And therefore, we see a lot of changes now with these dominant states or powerful states wanting to assert themselves also more forcefully, because they are seeing that somehow the rise of these emerging powers are also challenging their own dominant powers as well. And I think for us from the Global South, this is a moment where we should look at it as a moment of opportunity and challenges, how we address this, because it now puts us as the Global South, the AU, the CARICOM, and all of these. We have now the power to shape global governance going forward. If we miss this opportunity during this time of shifting, and because we can really see it is not something that is beginning now, and I think it reflects the asymmetric global power relations that has always been there. But every time we try to subvert and change and shift this hegemony of these powers, we see also how it regroups and then comes in new ways and new forms of power. And we can see how the US, for me now, disregard the UN. It's like the US, how many countries do we have at the UN? 190? 190, exactly. But one country is able to take a position that 191 countries cannot challenge. And that also speaks to how we should be able to take this. At the Israel-Palestine matter, the Ukraine-Russia matter, if we miss these opportunities actually for the 191 countries to be able to assert itself within these changing dynamics that we see, then it's better to engage multilaterally. Multilateralism will prevail at regional platforms, the SADC, the AU, but when we come to the UN, the entire continent is being seen. And why am I giving this background and coming to this? Is to show that Professor Albakeng has already shown that the men from weak states are also doing, as experiencing the same. Women, the papers have actually given us the experiences of women. Without us changing the global power structures, we will still experience this, in my view. Because the small states, if they are disregarded, what more of people from the global south, people from women in particular? And if you even take women in their intersectional profiles, then it's even worse because black women then will be at the bottom of the hierarchy. So, so my appeal is my comment here is around how do we change? I understand it's important that we will change for women, but we change women, and women are doing all this within a structure that is rigid and very strong. If it can, if what Professor Albakeng is saying around the UN, his experiences at the UN Security Councils, that they were being dismissed, ignored, and also not taken seriously because they were coming from what is perceived as weak states. Then what does it mean for the future? So it means then that, let me narrow it down here now, and I know I'm taking your time. Within our own countries, the people that we should be packaging this resistance together and this revolution together to change multilateralism at that level. We still have problems, especially in African and Arab countries, where issues of protocol, women are disregarded, regardless of what official papers are saying. There are spaces in this country as a woman in traditional places where I cannot even sit with men at the khotla or a khotla is a gathering of men. So we are not allowed to go. And I need these men from the global south for me to be able to challenge UN, practices at UN. But if men from the global south still believe that I don't belong at a khotla, how can we go together and challenge those weak states together? Because they are also not seeing the importance of women at a very lower level here, back home in a village. Women are nothing. Starting even in the families, there are cultures in these countries, in this country of us, protocol cultures when it comes to family negotiation for wedding. My own daughter, in certain cultures, I can't be in the lobola negotiation of my own daughter. This is a South African experience. Maybe it did not come out very well because of our speakers. But if I am seen as a non-entity in my daughter's marriage, what more of a traditional a community gathering of men where I need to have decisions that affect me represented? I will not have a voice. I don't have voice in the family, and I expect to have a voice at the UN. Really. So they elect us into these positions, but they know that they don't even believe in our voice and our representation, even at the UN, because we can't even represent ourselves at home. So I leave it here. Thank you.
Wow. Thought-provoking, thought-provoking, enriching comments, courageous questions. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, without overwhelming our speakers, I'm going to allow them, with so much wealth and experience from them, to speak, to respond to the comments and the questions, because they add value to their powerful presentations. We have noted, hence, we'll definitely take another round. Make sure that while they are responding to the comments and questions, you're noting them down. I have noted some few hands. I'm now going to hand over to them in no particular order. There's comments and questions, esteemed guests, presenters. Yes, the floor is now up to you. Thank you.
I hope I can do justice to some of the questions and comments. But first thing is to say that I do concur with you, Prof. It's really not an easy, it's quite a dilemma that you have described, where the patriarchal society is what dominates here, and it still is. It's entrenched. How I think possibly maybe let me start at the family level. I think that's where we need to start. How we educate our girls. That is where I would start. We need to educate our girls to see themselves as leaders. Girls need to see themselves also as not always being in the supporting role. You know, when you're going to school, um, it starts from there. You know, the girls don't get the leadership roles. They're not the president. Maybe they'll get the vice president or the secretary. We need to. It's a mindset that we have to change. So we have to start there first if we really want to conquer the continent. Which this is a big issue, but we have to start there. That is how I would think about it, address it there. You mentioned the Caribbean. We're not fully there yet, you know. We have made strides, but it's something that it has to be done incrementally, and I think it starts in the family. Your orientation, how we think, how we view ourselves. Why can't I be the president? Why is it that I should always be a vice in a supporting role? We women are not oriented that way. We women are, well, the thing about it, we women are different from men. We are the nurturers, we are the bearers of children, we are so and so. And sometimes we doubt ourselves. So there's a bit of self doubt. We feel that, oh no, I can't take up these leadership things now because I have to take care of the family. Real issues, real issues. But I think we have to start with here. It's a mindset. So that's how I would approach it first. But let me just comment on a few things that were said around the room. I saw common threads in the room in terms of how we are leveraging protocol in an archaic system like the United Nations that was raised by our diplomats, former diplomats. Um, it's true, and the reform of the United Nations is something that is urgently needed. From I was there many years ago, we've been talking about the reform of the United Nations, and it still has not been done because it's one of those entrenched things. But I believe with the evolving geopolitical landscape now, where we are seeing all these different blocks emerging, the multipolarity, which is emerging, is no longer a unipolar or a bipolar world. It's multipolar. I look at countries that are rising south, the G20, South Africa's leadership. I look at the BRICS countries. I look at several other plurilateral institutions that have been raising up. That's, I believe, that is where the strength is going to come from the coalition of the willing, where we, in our in different pockets, we might, we will have to put pressure on the global system. I think that's the only way it's going to be. And so starting from the family, where we tell our women that our girls, we can do it. We don't have to be listening to we don't have to be subordinate to a man. So we're teaching them from early. When they now emerge as the leaders, I think that is going to put pressure on the system. It has to change. When we when there is going to be the reform of the United Nations, a genuine reform, then we can reform some of these archaic protocol rules, which are rather male oriented. I give you an example. Even in our own foreign service setting, the rules, we looked at our rules. The rules are designed for men who with their wives accompanying them. It's not designed for me. I'm a woman with an accompanying spouse, a man accompanying. No, it was never designed for that because traditional diplomacy, the man was the diplomat, and you follow along as a woman. So you now have to look at your rules. Family. Women are family. Women are nurturers. Women are family, but they're also professionals. So we have to amend our rules to reflect that kind of thing. So it starts there, right? So um, a question was asked here about traditional protocol accommodating women. Well, I don't think it did, quite frankly, and I believe when we have all these different pressure points, as I said, rising south, we have to leverage that. I look at the Caribbean. We have made strides. We're not there yet, but we have made our strides. And if we have the coalition of all these different groups putting pressure, Prof, I'm always talking about it, the link with the diaspora, Africa and its diaspora. There are some very strong women out there in the African diaspora. And I think with the cross fertilization of ideas, as we have here, we have Prof. Bailey coming in, we have Professor Lawrence as well coming in, we can, that coalition can bring some pressure to bear to change our system. So that, I think that is how I would address some of these. Uh, so with my main point is with the rise in global south, we can change the shape, the tone of multilateralism to be more um, gender sensitive, so to speak. So those are my few words. Thank you.
Yes. Now, protocol, as my colleague, Her Excellency Don Thomas Edwards has said, is archaic in such a way that it is now moving towards being more gender sensitive than it was in the past. We found that in the past, when I joined the Foreign Service, as Ambassador said, it was mainly men, and everything was cultured on men. And so it was, it has taken decades or even centuries, if you go back to the beginning of protocol, to change the perspective of protocol and women. We still do have inequalities based on protocol in terms of, as I mentioned, seating arrangements, in terms of how women are viewed, in terms of the role of the woman play in the international affairs and arena. And so it is now becoming, it was very difficult at first, but now it is becoming more fluid in that it's allowing for more interaction for women to take the forefront of um, of international relations and the international arena. It was very difficult as for small. It's very difficult for small states still in terms of trying to get recognition for its women. As you may know, in CARICOM, we appointed a female Secretary General for the first time in its 53 years, and now it's being challenged by men. And so, we have to look at, are we reversing? Are we going back to what it used to be, or are we being positioned to advance in it? Small states' voices are not heard, as my ambassador has said. Um, when she spoke at the UN, there was no response, and she's a woman coming from a small state, and now we have to see how we can ge- create create a consensus around our positioning in terms of um, moving along the structures that will permit protocol to be more gender sensitive. And so, in terms of appearance, also, even the most best dressed woman can be seen to be the protocol officer when it's an ambassador. So, appearance does play an impact on in diplomacy and in protocol. And but it is to assert yourself. You have to find that you have to assert yourself in these positions of that you face when you're at the top of the hierarchy. You have to assert yourself and make yourself known that who you are, what you represent, and how you're going to go about doing this, and asserting yourself in correcting positions and perspectives as to what role you play in a delegation, what role you play in the UN, what role you play in the regional institutions. It is very important to assert yourself as a woman in protocol.
Wow, very, 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 very profound. As I'm listening, I find myself in a rather not a seminar, but in an inspirational setup, free motivation for myself. I pick up that it's in the mindset. And now the last comment was for us, especially women, to assert ourselves in spaces that we found ourselves in. Prof, when she started, before I give you a second round, she spoke about protocol that can be used to sustain power relations, or it can be used to instill inclusive and transformative leadership. And now we are just reminded that we need to instill leadership roles in women. And without that, we would not have made an impact to change the status quo. I'm sitting here feeling that this session is actually speaking to me too. And I hope that some women that are sitting here are finding it very relevant to themselves as well. For somebody who was told multiple times that I will amount to anything, and I must admit that I have amounted to everything that I wanted to amount to. Now, in terms of instilling leadership roles, I just want to say thank you, Prof, for ensuring that we are seen. Thank you for your inclusive and intentional leadership in making sure that we as postdocs, women are always participating in spaces where we are going to also feel empowered, feel recognized, and we are seen. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, now giving the opportunity for round number two. I hope that those who had indicated hands that they would like to make comments and questions, they have refined their questions and comments based on the feedback that has just been given. We are now on round number two. We still have time. We're very good on time. Please feel inspired, feel encouraged. Yes, number one. Feel confident. Number two. Assert yourself. This is your space. Please, we have two hands for now. And women, okay, maybe as you hear comments and questions, you will remember and revise your questions. I'm now handing over to hand number one. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Um, you will forgive us. We are so excited about the subject matter. It's a very rare kind of opportunity. In fact, we appreciate from the school, Thabo Mbeki. My name is Sizakele Makhanya. I am an international relations scholar, previously a protocol practitioner. Currently, I serve in the boards of transport. So we'll always reflect back from your footprint. And then may I also present the fact that the school, the founder, I served him as a protocol officer when I was young, in my youth. So I feel free at home, Dean. I really appreciate to see face of women in the school. I believe and I have confidence to the founder that in his tenure in the office, he believed in women, empowered women. Hence, you see such women. And can we give him in absentia the round of applause? Without wasting much time, program director, you'll forgive us. I will always like to reflect back from the origins of protocol as to, I know that maybe I did not attend the training due to some commitments. I would have loved to be here. And maybe let me just say, we embrace you in our country, Madam Phillips, Diana. And then we're looking forward to see you in the future. We really appreciate your time and such a comprehensive paper that you have presented to us. We relate, we've got experience, we've observed all those things that you have outlined in your paper. Going back to the roots, why did we have protocol? You'll remember that during the League of Nations, there was a reason for the state actors to unite because they were so tired of the war, to unite and form friendship in terms of cooperations. And that is when then diplomatic protocol was born. It was a means of encouraging friendship within the state actors. And ultimately, we had developed procedures. They are at an international level. So we practice this protocol at bilaterals, at multilateral, state-to-state friends in terms of all government, organizational formation, your IMO, International Maritime, your International Labor, you name them. So I like it when the Dean says, this protocol doesn't reside at the upper levels, upper echelon in terms of international. It cascades down to our communities, up to the family, because that's where you find the hierarchy of the family. The father is on top, we are told, religiously so, we are still told that hierarchy, and so on. Traditionally, you'll find this as they have explained. So there are these protocols, but let us go back to the subject matter, which is multilateral. The United Nations have embraced one goal, because we all know that there is sustainable development goals that have been implemented by the United Nations, but goal number 5 talks about gender equality. Now, I think we are deceived if the very same body that has got so many signatories in the entire world, but we are still overlooking goal number 5, which enforces us to, as women, to be equal, have the same voice, and so on and so on. But not going to shift to issues of politics, Security Council, where there is imbalances. We're still struggling from the developing countries to penetrate that formation or that echelon of the UN. I think I concur with the speakers. I will reflect this from home in South Africa. Well, maybe we are lucky in a way that in South Africa, we still embrace democracy. And then in South Africa, government still embraces a lot of women to participate in a form of government. And many women, it's public knowledge that they are given positions of power. But what is important is, if you are given a position of power, what influence, what trademark, what footprint do you make as a woman? We can be excited here and think that whatever that we're saying is not known, it's known. Maybe we don't aspire confidence. Now I'm talking from home because I'm not in Jamaica. Maybe in Jamaica, it's a different dilemma. Very important. Also, if you are given an opportunity, are you able to empower those who are coming behind you as women? What kind of a leader are you as a woman before you want to escalate and go and occupy a position in the multilateral sector at the highest level? What in my own sector, in my own office, am I aspire confidence in empowering women? Because we all know that we are coming from disadvantaged position. Women were never acknowledged and so on and so on. But if you are given power to influence policy, to influence regulations, do we leave footprint so that when you look back, you say, at least this is what I have done. In fact, you don't have to say, because they will, Thabo Mbeki, he's not here. I am quoting him in his absentia because of his footprint that he has done for women. One example, we as a country, we appointed Her Excellency Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma to African Union. Guess what? She was not so, I just want to be diplomatic, warmly welcomed, right? Because of her gender, right? Nobody remembered that she had footprint political. She was given even a strategic position in South Africa for so many years, being the foreign minister. But we encountered that. If you have opened the news today, my visitors, I'm sure yesterday, if you have watched South African news, there's a woman there. It took one man to write about her, that she doesn't deserve this and that, and it caused a stir in the entire country. It still boils down to the issue of gender equality. Nobody saw her that she is capable to occupy that position. They even overlooked her qualification, experience, and all that. So it's a very sensitive issue, and no one is going to stand for us except for ourselves. Also, we cannot be women who want to be in the forefront without arms. We need to be armed. Knowledge is power. You need to be knowledgeable. You need to understand this. I saw a need for me to be here because I understand the subject matter. I wanted to have a voice for this subject matter. I wanted to have an impact for future. Given an opportunity, I know what to do. And also, I know that maybe I'm not even yet there in terms of arming myself. Maybe I still need PhD, Dean, for me to have a voice in the UN. I've never been there. Well, I've been there physically when I was serving, but I wish I could be in a forum so that I could see that the woman in Asia and the woman in Africa and the woman in Americas are we speaking the same language. I hear you are saying in the Middle East. I know that we still have a challenge. There are things that are not in our control, but there are also things that are low-hanging fruits for us to be able to reform the issue that has been addressed by this paper. I will pause right there, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Koliswa Kleinboy. I'm a former public servant. I also interface with protocol. I was a senior manager in events and stakeholder relations. And thank you to the school, the dean, and excellencies for enriching us with your experiences and knowledge in terms of the role of women in the multilateral spaces. What I was more interested in is your experience is really rich and informative. was to look at the alliances that you spoke about when you said that you need to build alliances. To what extent have you, besides the formal structures of the UN Security Council or other multilateral structures, to what extent have you used media also to elevate yourselves in terms of the impact of your role for a country to send its representatives to such an important structure, and five of them are women and one is male, is really a success story, including your minister who's re-elected as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and she's a female. So those are some of the things that we generally wouldn't hear about through the media unless if we attend such seminars, or maybe we happen to be studying towards gender roles within media. So that would be something that would be really important. But also what was very concerning was to note that the anti-African sentiment within the global multilateral structures still continues unabated, and it would call for all African, diplomats who are in those structures to rally behind one voice, one message, and to make sure that your successes are known. Because most of the time, these spaces are behind closed doors. It's secret, engagements. It cannot be something that you can talk about, but really, it is something that is important for the general public to know, because in order for us to reposition, especially countries from the global south, is through visibility in the media and for us to know what successes have been achieved in those structures. But I was just going to say that it's very encouraging to see a country having, trust in women, especially the one of the second term for your minister.
Thank you so much, ladies. Any more comments before I hand over to our speakers? Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much. I understand this is enriching, this is powerful, this is very informative. You must be digesting wherever you are sitting. Okay, in the absence of comments and more questions, I'm going to hand over once again to our presenters to indulge us once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. I too have been enriched by the experiences that you have shared as well. And I thank you for your kind comments. Um, I'm going to pick up on your points. You mentioned alliances and the importance of that, and whether women, well, I'm interpreting to say that women need to use all these different avenues in order to project their voice. And I agree with you. Um, in the multilateral setting, you cannot survive without alliances. Networking is key. Networking, if you cannot network, you're going to die. You will fail miserably. So you have to build alliances. Let me give you some examples using my own experiences, or even when we were on the Security Council. We were part of the elected 10, because you have the P5 and you have the elected 10, who the P5 considered to be visitors, because you rotate on and you rotate off. Every 2 years you have different people coming in and out. And when some of us wanted change, we had on the council, we had what we call the NAM caucus, the non-aligned movement. So the countries, African countries and the Caribbean countries, we always formed a little alliance together. So that was very important. And there was a lot of opposition, from the P5. A comment was made while I was at the Security Council was, who are you tourists coming to try to come into my living room and try to change my furniture? That was that was what they were perceived as. But what I found was important was that we formed alliances together. So we had the E10, we had the NAM caucus. So we would sit together and try to negotiate common positions so that we could have force in numbers. So I told you earlier in my presentation when we were um, having these open meetings, we introduced more transparency in the Security Council. So when we're introducing these open meetings and where the whole international community could come and observe a meeting of the Security Council and discuss a thematic issue, it was a new thing. Lot of pushback. Um, you couldn't, we didn't interface that much with the media when we were on the Security Council then because it was a closed shop. One of the things we did under our presidency was to have media briefings. We had a lot of them. Um, so what I'm saying, in order to succeed, you have to network, you have to have alliances. And we engage the media quite a bit. We engage other groups. We're constantly having meetings because you need to build coalitions. Coalitions are very important if you really want to succeed. You mentioned the anti-Africa sentiment. Well, that's true. When we were on the council, this was a long time ago, but I think it still persists now. Most of the agenda items have to do with African conflict, and Africa is painted in the light of being the dark continent. It's still seen that way. Thankfully, while we were there were missions coming to Africa. It was done for the first time when we were there in 2000, where we went to Sierra Leone, we went to DR Congo, we went to even Yugoslavia as well. But I'm just dealing with the African continent. So when we started coming to the continent to see what was on the ground. So yes, the African sentiment was there, but one of the things which is important was that I'm going back to Africa and its diaspora. And I see it happening even now in the Security Council, where there's a push towards Security Council reform, and it's the African countries, along with the Caribbean. It was piloted by the St. Vincent when they were president of the council a couple of years ago, where we come together and build that kind of alliance, because that is how we can make changes. Incremental, it's not going to come overnight, because as we all know in the room, we're up against an establishment, and it's entrenched. And these entrenched values, entrenched thoughts don't go overnight. But it's when we work together, Africa with its diaspora is one big alliance. I think that's powerful, and it's something that you shouldn't ignore. The Caribbean is there. We are natural partners with Africa. Natural. It's not this is not make believe, because we are from here. It's just that we are the displaced people out there. So when Africa unites with its diaspora, I think that is one. And I say, when I say unite in a very meaningful way with the diaspora, not just a token thing. We have several initiatives going on, but when we begin to acknowledge each other, have exchanges with each other, have you know more knowledge about each other, because we don't know each other. No, we don't know each other very well. I realize that. So when we begin to know that, then one, we change mindsets, then we build alliances, and then we can conquer. Thank you.
Yes, in terms of building alliances in protocol is very important. And I commend you and I thank you for your comments, both of you. And in terms of getting the media involved in spreading the word about what is happening, you have to look at who is behind the media and what are the issues they're focusing on. Are they focusing on gender? No, they're focusing on male oriented issues. And so that is going to be very difficult for us, even with female media uh, correspondents. They are directed to focus on certain issues that are male dominated. And so it is very difficult for us to get media coverage at this time. But we have to build alliances, as Ambassador has said, build alliances to make sure that our voices are heard in every respect. In terms of protocol, it's building alliances within the international organizations to ensure that protocol is reflected as one in which women and men are treated as equally. I- It's interesting that protocol was established to ensure unanimity and equal treatment for nation states, but it did not react to treating women and men as equals. And that is something that we have to work on. That is very important. And so we have to look at it as something that is very critical and crucial to getting more persons, more women visible at the UN through protocol. As you know, there's elections for the UN Secretary General, and there are 5 women out of 7 candidates, and that is going to be a very interesting outcome to see who wins the position for Secretary General at the UN. Are they still being hampered by perception of them in terms of protocol and how they're perceived per se in relation to men? Well, we'll have to see. Thank you.
Her Excellencies, Ms. Lawrence and Mrs. Thomas Edwards, thank you very much for taking time and for your enriching presentations to us. In the absence of questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being interactive. At this point, I'm going to open the floor for closing remarks by Professor Bietendach. Thank you so much. Over to you, Prof.
Mm. Thank you, Dr. Coley, for facilitating this process and this discussion in such a professional and diplomatic manner. Thank you also to our 2 panelists, Her Excellency, Ms. Thomas Edward, and our distinguished guest speaker, Ms. Lawrence, for your sobering and call to action inputs. Because truly, if you are not at this point inspired to make a difference and to make a contribution and to take up your women power and voices to run forward and to promote our role and our places in the diplomatic and the environment altogether, then you were asleep. Your Excellency, our Dean, Professor Pashwana, our distinguished guest speaker, Ms. Lawrence, esteemed members and our International Advisory Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It falls on me this morning to close this session, and I do it with gratitude. Ms. Lawrence, thank you. Your message emphasized the fact that the impact and the protocol of women in the past, and unfortunately still is, completely and not uniform, to such an extent that it is discriminative. It is a sticky issue because it is embedded in institutional norms, in values, in power relations, and cultures, as we've learned. You also mentioned that it is very dangerous, not only for us women, but for our countries, our societies, and the progress of the globe altogether, because it impacts on the influence and the development and growth of women's careers. So, and I think what was also very impactful for me was that this issue is far more than compliance, than the ink on paper that's written. It has to move to a point of conscious practice. So, women, and that is the universal call, women has to take up their role, their responsibilities, and use their voices to become the agents and the architects for gender-sensitive protocol and diplomacy. There's no more hiding here. You showed us that protocol is an instrument, one that quietly determines who is seen, who is heard, and who is moved down the list. And we've experienced that, all of us. And you spoke of this instrument not as someone who has merely learned from our own experiences, but someone who held the pen, who held the pen, and you did it in a graceful manner, like a true diplomatic and diplomat should actually do, and set by example. Your Excellency and Dr. Coley, thank you for the panel and for the direction of the keynote. You really gave us an opportunity to not just state the obvious, but to take the whole discussion further. You provided, because what we've seen is that you've provided insights from serving missions. You've provided impacts and shared perspectives from the negotiation room yourselves, from the inside, and you demonstrated the conscious, active action that is required for us to deal with this issue. Professor Pashwana, thank you so much for your welcome this morning, but more so for allowing us, and Dr. Coley actually mentioned it earlier, but to allow us to have this seminar, which is so impactful, because seminars of this nature will only happen if you have a leader who can take action and who can pull us all forward. Our international board members, specifically Professor Bailey here today, thank you very much for, and I know the long distances, and that's Lawrence here, that you have been traveling to join us even this morning. And it is no small matter. We know that jet lag is for real. Like global warming, someone should spread that news as well somewhere to the US. All right, so thank you so much. We do appreciate you. To everyone who participated, thank you. But then I also want to thank the SABC and our own technical team behind the cameras for really assisting us in spreading the gospel of consciousness and the gospel of gender sensitive diplomacy and protocol. To the staff of the Thabo Mbeki School who arranged the invitations, the room, and the hundred of small things that happens behind the scenes that we don't see. From arranging the holding room for our distinguished guests, etc., etc. Thank you very much. It is a daunting task, and I'm grateful that that is not mine. Then I want to close off by saying the measure of a morning like this is not what has been said here, but what is done differently on Monday. So, on that, I believe that we all have work to do. So, thank you. And now I would like to invite our Dean, Professor Pashwana, to deliver a small, offer a small token of appreciation to our panelists. So, finally, thank you all for your time and your presence here this morning. Travel safely, and to those who have come from abroad, we will think of you in dealing with the jet lag. And we hope and we know this will not be your last visit because you have become intertwined friends with of the Thabo Mbeki School. Good afternoon to everyone.
Let me also take this opportunity to thank Professor Buitendag for facilitating this program with so much grace and professionalism. Thank you so much, Prof.